Joining us now, Clark Mercer, Chief of Staff for the Governor of Virginia, Governor Ralph Northam. He was also his Chief of Staff when the Governor was Lieutenant Governor, so he's been with him quite a long time. And he's also part of the Virginia High School Football Hall of Fame. He was a fabled punter back in the day and played college football, and he's with us now. So time permitting, we can talk a little Redskins at the end. Hey, Clark, great to have you with us.
Thanks, John, for having me on.
Okay, now before we get to politics, you played college football. You were a renowned punter in high school, right?
You know, I place kicked and punted and played a little defensive back and receiver as well. So.
And then what about in college?
In college, I just place kicked and punted, yeah. So I went to T.C. Williams, home of Remember the Titans.
Yes.
And actually had both Coach Boone and Coach Yost either taught me in school or coached me on the team. So when I came out of college, I came back to TC and coached their soccer team for a handful of seasons. So.
Were you in the movie?
No, I wasn't, but know a lot of the folks that are in that movie. And actually, it's funny, Coach Yost, who is the Bill Yost, was my father's coach at Hammond High School, which is, in the movie, it's the more predominantly white high school that integrates with T.C. Williams, and he was a running back for Coach Yost in the 60s. So
wow,
a lot of history in Alexandria.
All right. Well, let's get to the governor and some of the decisions he made yesterday, Clark. And I want to start with I thought he had a good day yesterday. I think all the right moves. The governor is suspending any new spending right now because, you know, in reality, Clark, no one knows exactly what is going to happen, right?
Yeah, and you've got it right, and Senator Peterson earlier did. It's called unobligating our new spending. And basically what that says is that it takes a timeout or a pause on the budget. And it says right now, you know, if we reforecast the budget and ask the economists and the folks that help us reforecast what would the future look like over the next 2 years, they wouldn't really be able to tell us with the accuracy that we would want to be good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. So what we're doing is saying, hey, you know what, this budget we passed, all the new spending in it, it's going to sit there, but agencies, you don't have the authority to spend that money. And you're not going to have the authority to spend that money until the General Assembly comes back and gives you the authority to do so. So there was a concern when we left, when the legislators left Richmond, that this would be, up to the governor to kind of pick and choose winners in the budget. And, we understood the legislators' concerns with that. And we said, look, we're going to work with you. We're going to hit the pause button and no new spending until you all come back, for a special session, most likely, once the fog has lifted and we can better articulate what the path looks like.
So, Clark, the budget was passed by the General Assembly, and they have the authority to pass the spending. So that was passed by the General Assembly in the 2020 session. So by what authority does the governor have in the Constitution to suspend those increases?
Well, he doesn't. They're going to come back on April 22nd. And that's the reconvene day. That's the veto session. It can last a day, can last a couple days. And the General Assembly will consider the governor's amendments to the budget. And we have our finance team literally working around the clock. Every new item in a very, very large budget that has new spending will have a section that unobligates that spending. And I would expect the General Assembly would probably want to take that up in a block rather than each item. Mm-hmm. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of new items, and they would have to vote to approve that. So it's up to them to approve that on April 22nd. But that has been, working with the Speaker, working with the Senate leadership, and Republicans and Democrats on the money committees. That has been the path forward that the governor has suggested, and we've gotten good feedback. And look, it's difficult for folks. It's difficult for the governor. We had a lot of initiatives in the budget that we were excited about. So it's a tough pill to swallow, but it's the correct path forward. You just can't reforecast in the middle of all of this and get any sort of accurate read. And so what we're going to do is we're going to wait until probably the summertime when we think we have a little bit better picture of what the financial picture looks like. But to your question, John, that the General Assembly would have to approve that on April 22nd.
So basically, what the General Assembly would do is under the amendment day or the veto day, they would come back. And blanketly, they could approve forestalling any new spending except for essential services. So if they had a pay-in increase for teachers or state police, they would have to wait, things of that nature. Any spending that was new could get in one package and simply be suspended.
Yes, sir, and that's new spending that's in the budget. I will say that they'll come back on the 22nd and also handle legislation, and they passed over 1,200 pieces of legislation.
Jeez.
So that means that our staff has had to work through with our legal counsel and the governor between 50 and 70 bills a day since they left Richmond.
Jeez. Just
to get to reconvene sessions. So we have this week between 300 and 400 bills to handle, and the pause on spending is in House Bill 29 and 30, which is the budget bills. There are pieces of legislation that have some fiscal impact attached to them, and that's not captured in this exercise. The governor will handle each bill how he handles every bill. He'll either sign it, he'll either veto it, or he'll amend it, and they'll have to cover those on April 22nd as well. And that, in total, is about $32 million, in spending based on legislation. To put that in comparison, John, it's about $1 billion each year for the next 2 years that we're putting a pause on in spending that's captured in the budget.
So you're talking about $2 billion basically pause in spending. Of the 1,200 pieces of legislation, Clark, that have been passed by the General Assembly 2020, give me an estimate. How many of those is Governor Northam going to veto?
Well, he's acted on about 800 of them so far. And, John, I'm not sure is the answer, and we don't like to talk about kind of what he's going to do on bills until he actually takes action on them. Mm-hmm. So that's that. If there's legislators listening, which I'm sure there are, that's the last thing we want to do is talk about one of their pieces of legislation that might not be going into law over the radio. We try to give folks a heads up and talk to them first. So, there's some amendments, John, that the governor will offer to legislation, and then the legislature has the opportunity to accept those amendments or reject them. And if they reject the amendment, John, then the governor, depending on where those votes are, the governor then will be in a position he will either have to sign the bill or veto it. And the reason I can't tell you with some accuracy of how many bills will be vetoed is I think the governor will make some suggestions to some bills that he hopes the General Assembly accepts. And if they don't accept his suggestions, then he's going to be left in a position to either sign the bill without his suggestions or veto them. And that'll be something we'll have to decide after April 22nd.
All right, so if I understand what you're saying correctly, Clark, Mercer, that some of the vetoes would be a direct function of whether his amendments, the level of some of his amendments got accepted. So if he had some amendments on a particular bill and they all got rejected, then he might just come back and veto it. If some of them got accepted, then he might have to make a subjective decision. So that's why you can't give me a clear answer. Now, even if you were able to, it sounds like it's going to depend on the action of some of these amendments. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're with Clark Mercer. Clark is the Chief of Staff for Governor Ralph Northam, Democrat of Virginia. Okay, two other decisions the governor made yesterday that I applauded. Number one, moving the May municipal elections in Virginia. Of course, not everybody has those, but those towns that do, Chesapeake is one of them, moving those to November. Well, I thought that made perfect sense, and I'll just give you my 1 cent and then get you to comment. Number one, the problem with voting in May is not the voters. It's the poll workers, and many of them are aged. They're senior citizens. That's the base of the poll workers. And you certainly don't want to expose a vulnerable segment of society to this virus for elections in May that can easily be held in November. I mean, I've always been in favor of having them in November anyway because you get a bigger turnout. So I think that made sense. Anybody that argues with that would be a head scratcher to me. You also moved the primary election back 2 weeks, which is in his constitutional authority, from June 9th to June 23rd. And my estimation on that is June 9th, fine. June 23rd, fine. Who cares? If it's safer for 2 weeks, who cares? As long as those running for office have the date and its date certain, I think you go forward with it.
Well, I agree with your rationale on that. Look, the May to November elections, there's a bigger policy choice that all our localities have to make, and we have localities that have the elections. They stick with the elections in May. I live in Hanover County, in the town of Ashland. We have May elections for our town council, and there's some jurisdictions that have moved their elections to November. That's not a decision that we care to weigh in on. We let localities decide that. And you kind of express your opinion and about moving to November. I think there's some good public policy reasons why you would want more people participating and saving money at the local level. That's not what we're caring to weigh in on with this. We have a pretty graceful and common sense solution, which is to move this to November. And John, I tell you, if you want to get folks' attention and get a strong bit of feedback, is start talking about local elections, and all politics is local. Look, there's some folks that are up in a few weeks that felt strongly that they wanted to keep the elections on the books for May, and they said they had a lot of absentee ballots in already. They've spent money on their elections, and they don't want to compete with trying to get media space in the presidential election. And all of that I understand and I get. But the health and well-being of Virginians outweighs those concerns. The legislature, John, I will tell you, they have to vote to do this on April 22nd, and the ball's in their court now. The governor has articulated what he thinks makes the most sense.
No-brainer. No, this is an absolute no-brainer, and I'm sorry about the local politicians that have spent money. I'm sorry. But
well, and John, I'll tell you that a couple folks said, why don't you just move the May elections to the primary date? By code, we can't move. You can't have a primary election across the Commonwealth on the same date as a general election with the way the machines work, with the number of ballots you'd have to have.
Right.
You'd have to change the state code to do that. In terms of the primary date in June, we talked with our congressional delegation. We talked with folks in the General Assembly. Look, the governor can move that back 14 days. There's a comfort level there in doing that gets us a little bit further down the road. Again, why wouldn't you do that? At the end of the day, John, you hit the nail on the head. It's our poll workers are all in the exact age set that we don't want them out sitting at polls. And
it's all about the poll workers. I mean, that's just the bottom line. It's all about the poll workers.
You don't want folks fearing for their life by voting. Look, I get it. And Senator Peterson was correct, and I hope we can get to it. We're going to have to find a glide path to get back to functioning like we're used to, and I completely agree with them. But, you don't, in the middle of a stay-at-home order, run elections across the Commonwealth. And yes, they're town elections, but we have a lot of towns and a lot of counties, and they add up. And you can't have, some of the localities said, well, it needs to be a more nuanced approach. Each locality should be able to run their elections how they want to. You can't have 85 different elections being run in 85 different directions across the Commonwealth. They need to be uniform. And so the governor made that decision. I hope the General Assembly follows suit on the 22nd, but, ball's in their court, and we'll see what they do.
Of all the problems we have, another 6 million people filing for unemployment this week, moving town and city elections from May to November in order to protect senior poll workers, to me, was a absolute no-brainer decision. All right, a couple questions. Let's get to this special session, April 22nd. Well, you have social distancing in place, and you have a shutdown. How do you go to work? How do you have a special session? How do you vote? How does this happen? And stay in the guidelines of the governor's order.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, obviously the legislature is the ones driving that train, John. We have assigned our Department of Health to work with the Speaker's office and the Clerk's office in the House and the Senate as well. I believe it was reported this week that the Senate is moving to the a very, very large venue at the Science Museum of Virginia, which will allow them to do all the social distancing. They're talking about kind of, with the Department of Health, how to make sure to run that session. I believe the House, is looking at an outdoor venue. The logistics of how they pull that off and get their votes done. I know the Speaker, I know the Majority Leader are working hard to make sure they can accommodate. It's a tough situation. Constitutionally, they need to come back and meet. And I know they've been exploring, coming back and addressing some aspect of the code with respect to remote meeting and being able to meet by conference call and that kind of stuff. And right now, obviously, that's not envisioned in the Constitution. And so I think they want to come in and get out as quickly as possible, and they're going to do so abiding by the social distancing. But it's, under the executive order, John, it clearly makes exceptions for traveling for work. It clearly makes exceptions for traveling for essential government services, both of which would fall under the reconvened session.
Okay, so it sounds like the way it works is the General Assembly themselves makes the decision on how to convene, where to go, right? It's got to be up to
That's
them.
correct. Yep,
But it is going forward April 22nd, so you have to have that.
correct.
We had another 6.6 million people filing for unemployment. The economy is collapsing. Small businesses, so far, 3 million of them have shut down and said they can't reopen. That's been in 3 weeks. Here's the numbers for Virginia. The number of beds that you thought you need is down. The percentage on these various things has been down, not under what you guys have said. And remember, hospital beds and overrunning our system has been the main thing. Right now, you've got 563 people needing care. What is the metric that you, Clark, and the governor are looking at that says we can get back to producing and get Virginians back to work? What number is that?
Gotcha. Well, let me go through a couple numbers and talk about that a little bit. And these numbers, I think, will be updated today or tomorrow. But we've got a little under 500 COVID cases right now in intensive care across Virginia, and that's of those 500 in the ICU, about 300 of those for COVID are using ventilators. And we obviously have more individuals using ventilators for other reasons. So we've got about a little over 700 ventilators in use right now, which is about 27% of all of the ventilators that we have. And we're obviously working with the anesthesiologists to retrofit their machines to be able to be used. We're looking at being able to use one ventilator for two patients, that sort of thing. We have a total, John, of a little over 4,000 coronavirus cases. And since yesterday, we have 397 new cases overnight. And that includes 34 new deaths since yesterday. So we have 109 total deaths. And we are looking at that ICU admission, that ventilator number. We have about 2,000, John, ICU beds and about 2,600 ventilators. And we feel pretty comfortable that we can convert, the hospitals can convert a number of their rooms, especially rooms, John, that were built more recently. It's easier to convert those to ICU rooms. So yesterday we talked with the CEOs of all of our major health systems, and we're talking about what their capacity is. We're talking to them about, hey, if you're in one region of the state with a certain amount of capacity and another region of the state is over capacity, how are we moving folks between regions of the state if we need to? We're looking at those surge facilities, working with the Army Corps, talking about if we need those, where they would be, how we would use them. And more importantly, John, one of the things that's kind of lost in this discussion about the surge facilities, how would our hospital systems integrate with those surge facilities? Last thing you want to do is stand up one of those that the hospitals don't use or don't want to use or can't staff. So we're looking at the ICU admissions, and we're looking at that curve. And I've been listening to you this morning and listening to Senator Peterson, and we are having active conversations every day. And to Senator Peterson's point, the legislature is part of those, needs to be more part of those discussions, which they will be. The judicial branch needs to be part of those. I talked to my counterpart in Maryland just yesterday, and the point that we were making, John, is, we need in that 4 to 8 week time frame to really articulate clearly how we're going to get things, quote unquote, turned back on, because Maryland shouldn't, open their bars for business one day and not talk to Virginia, because then everyone in Virginia is just going to go to Maryland bars, right? And so, we need to coordinate this, especially in that DMV region and the.
Well, listen, I get what you're saying about the coordination, but you've got 8.5 million people here that want to get back to work, and Larry Hogan is running for president in 2024. So he's got a blatant political agenda. I don't give a rat's ass what Larry Hogan says. I mean, I get the position that you guys are in, but this guy is running for president. So he's got a political agenda, except our state has got 8.5 million people. We've got 615 in the hospital, 75 dead, and we have the entire economy shut down. People don't have a job, and 16 million people.
100 that are dead, and 34 just in the last 24 hours. So, I mean, that's the kind of, if we're going to talk about data, it needs to be the data we're talking about. Look, John, we're not looking to Governor Hogan to tell us what to do, and I'm not going to get into his politics and what his future might hold at a staff level. And frankly, Governor Hogan and Governor Northam, we've had great conversations. The point is, it would be nice to coordinate some of this, and it'd be nice to coordinate with, in the Mid-Atlantic here. It's not going to.
But you're not giving Virginians a metric. This is what. But you're not giving us a metric. You're not saying what is the number and at what point is a decision made where we can get back to work and give people back their lives, their livelihoods, their families. So we're not going to be dealing with suicide, death, alcoholism, drug overdose, all the things that are coming down the pike that nobody wants to talk about or measure. We're talking about the 100 people dead.
John, I've gotten on a couple times with you, and I've talked about those very things every time. If you want a specific number of who's going to be on ICU at what point, it's not as black and white as that. We are looking at that. We're very willing and would like to pull back from that June 10th date. We've said that all along. The governor would like to be able to do that. We're talking every day about how we get folks back to work. I will tell you, John, that when you look at Virginia and a lot of other states, we didn't take the tack of putting every single person out of work. We have a lot of industries that are still open. The only businesses, John, that are shut down right now by this emergency order are those where people congregate in large groups, and the spread of this virus would be highly likely. We didn't take a sledgehammer to, hey, this law firm can close, but this one's got to be open, or John Fredericks has got to close, but this thing can stay open. We looked at the non-essential businesses, and we want to be able to lift that. And it's going to be that curve. We're hoping, John, and the president says this on his briefings, we're hoping that curve is peaking, and we're hoping it's coming down. Our fingers are crossed. We're looking at that every day. And if we're on the downslope, John, to that curve, and those numbers are coming down a little bit, we are going to be talking about how we do exactly what you are articulating, which is getting the economy going and getting these folks the help that they need. And look, it's the small business loans through the CARES Act. That's helpful, but people need working capital. That's what our small businesses need. And they don't need to take on more debt right now and more uncertainty. They need working capital, and we're looking at what revenue streams we might be able to avail ourselves at the state level to incentivize folks to put folks back to work. And the other piece of this, and we'll follow up with the legislature about this, is, John, we do a good job of supporting Virginia businesses and recruiting new businesses. And VDP, and it's, the person who runs VDP for us served as Secretary of Commerce for 8 years under a Republican governor in Louisiana, has a great team here in Virginia. We were named the best state for business last year. And the point that we have made to them is, we're going to have to rethink over the next year or so how we recruit and grow businesses in Virginia. And we better pay attention and prioritize in helping those Virginia businesses that are already here, that are already paying taxes, get back to work. And if they've laid people off, how do we incentivize them to add folks back to their payroll? So I don't think it's, the whale hunting for big businesses and recruiting them from other states and going on international trade missions. For the next year, we're going to have to be laser focused on those businesses that were decimated during coronavirus, and how do we stand them back up? Because they're the ones that have already committed to Virginia, and we owe them over this next year or two, or however long it takes, to make sure they can get back on their feet.
I agree with that 100%. That's a very insightful, fair, and sober approach, and certainly a sea change from the way we've done it before. But you're right. I mean, the small businesses that have suffered in this state, that have seen their revenues go away and their dreams shattered, and no revenue coming in, and laying people off, and they can't get paid. I mean, it's causing tremendous anxiety. And again, all I'm asking for is that when these decisions are made about when to reopen, and hope it's going to be before June 10th, that the economic impact of the shutdown is taken into equal consideration with the aspects of the virus from the medical standpoint, and the social aspects that go with the shutdown of production in Virginia. I just want a balanced look at it, and I think if you guys do that, I'm confident, as you did the other day, I thought the governor made 3 good decisions. He did the right thing. I just want you to do the right thing. And Clark, we want to get back to work. That's the bottom line. We want to get back to work, and the governor of Maryland, I don't care what you say, he has a blatant political agenda, and I certainly don't want the decisions that Virginia's making be tied to his run for president in 2024.
Well, I can assure you that they're not, and I've said this before. Look, Governor Northam has not appeared on any cable network during this coronavirus. He gives briefings, was daily now 3 times a week. He does hyper-local interviews. He's not running for president. He's not running for anything again. He's always wanted to return to medicine and treat patients, which he will. And so he is making decisions based on Virginia. And like we've said, once the fog clears and we get through all this, we can kind of return to agreeing and disagreeing over different policies that he may have. But I can assure you, and look, folks have said, why don't you get on cable TV? This is your time to kind of get out there and get on cable TV. You're the only doctor that's a governor. And he said, you know what, my focus is on Virginia, and I don't have time to be on cable TV news all day long. I'm focused on Virginia. And, I kind of challenge you to find him being on any of the cable TV networks doing that. So my point with Maryland was not that we're following one's lead, but the point is it would be nice to coordinate, especially somewhere where you have, borders. I'll tell you, in Southwest Virginia, John, we had a number of folks with concerns about our ATV trails. Kentucky, Tennessee shut theirs down, which led to a lot of folks hauling their ATVs into Southwest Virginia, spending time in the community, going to the gas stations, mixing it up with the local community, then leaving, going to other states. And the point was, can we be consistent here with our neighbors, because it's putting a lot of us on edge. We're trying to do social distancing, but we don't know who these folks are, and we're worried they might be spreading something. Are we talking to our neighbors? So it doesn't matter if the governor is a Republican or a Democrat. If they border Virginia, we want to be mindful of those regions, and that was my only point. So,
all right, excellent. Clark, Mercer, we're out of time. The Chief of Staff for Governor Ralph Northam of Virginia. Clark, I really appreciate your coming on.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you,
John.
Clark.